That's my microphone. Hi. Am I? Let's see. I'm not muted. Dynamite. So has everybody? Let me see. Just raise your hand. Has everybody got the stuff that I sent in the mail? No, not yet, huh? Okay, so that's all right. By next week you'll have it because it's been posted and I was taking everybody. So for this work, we're going to move to colored paper, right? It really doesn't matter what type. All right, so there are two types that are recommended, neither of which I have yet. But there's gray Canson and tan Canson paper, or a piece of cardboard will do the same result. And you need a white pencil, a fragment of which I have here, and a black pencil. I may use one of these slightly off-white colors. And so I think the first thing to know about when you're working with toned paper, the color of the paper is a midpoint. Does everybody have a black and a white pencil? Working with pencils, one of the things to remember to do is you must remember to keep that pencil, the pencil sharp. Oh, how I lose things right on top of me, I'll never understand. There was a pencil sharpener sitting on my desk. Come on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what are we supposed to already have done? Like what assignments are we supposed to have done?
I imagine that you will have one or two of the ink drawings. Does that sound reasonable? I mean, what I'm hoping to do with the class is to sort of give you outline, you know, what we have to do in the first section, and let you spend the second section drawing and me providing, you know, some kind of feedback for that drawing. So I think that that's going to work well. If we need to adjust that, we will. Are you worried about missing an assignment? Don't be. The last thing you have to worry about is missing anything for this class.
No, I just wasn't sure
Yeah.
how many we
No,
were supposed to have done.
you know, I would be astonished if you had three of them done, but if you had one finished and one underway, I think that would be sufficient. They're not as easy. Well, first off, I was delighted to hear that people figured out that, you know, we learned that there was a way to do this, and some people expressed some trepidation about being able to do them. Now that you know how to do them, basically other iterations are essentially the same. And when you get these, I hope I've sent you multiple versions of this. We're going to use the same process to transfer some kind of outline onto colored paper. But I'm hoping as you do more of this work, more of these drawings, you're more and more comfortable working in the abstract. That is, you understand the shapes that underlie this perspective, and that now you're kind of improvising. I really don't care that you literally copy everything that's in that photo. What I care about is that you understand the underlying geometry and you're able to create a compelling, a persuasive image that convinces me that there's some depth in that drawing. And so the first three drawings that you do on white paper with pen and ink, I think I have one here somewhere. Hang on. Well, that's all right. You've seen them before. So and every now and then, I'll show you. Okay, so this is stuff that I've been working on over the weekend. If there are things that you see here, I'm designing a building. It's about the size of a city block. But the facade of that building is largely going to be determined by the units and how they stack together. So, you know, when you design housing, you have bedrooms together and that. These are just trace drawings of the same thing. You take a piece of trace paper to an image that you like or that you want to modify, right? So I may start with a technical drawing that looks like that. And then I imagine what this could be if I were to sort of bring forward some surfaces and push back some others, right? So in a sense, the drawing that you guys are working on is much more complex than those. But I'm hoping by the time we get to, when we do the kitchen drawing and the plan and the section using the pencils and the markers, I'm hoping that that stuff becomes you'll find that easy. Uh, It'll turn up when I don't need it. Okay, so I may, and for brevity's sake, let me see. You know what it is? It's disorienting because I've never done this on my desk. So, all right. So the color of the paper is a mid-tone. So let's imagine that you want to do a gradient. You want to go from dark to light. That's as light as that's going to get. So you decide on what your darkest mark is, and then you gradually want to fade it out. Till you imagine that the middle tone is the paper, right? It's surprisingly difficult to get the that middle value to read. I got to stand up here. Then you're going from the lightest mark that you could make and you gradually fade that out till you get to the middle point. And this is like the halfway part. I haven't done a very good job with it. I found the white. You might find it easier to work from light to dark. Don't worry about how big this drawing is. You're just trying to understand how this works, how this reads, right? sometimes it's helpful to create a little bit of a background. Imagine that you're looking at a coin. I guess we can barely see that, huh? I don't want to draw it with a black pencil, so I'm looking for something that's blue. All right, let me see if I get that to. So you want to get your viewer to get a sense that you're going around that shape, and what you end up in the middle is the color of the paper. It's a little bit difficult to read when you have the paper as a background as well, but consider this. If I were to create a mask, here's a piece of gray paper. I suppose I could draw on the back side of that as well. So here's gray. Maybe, let me see it. Let me try it here. Pardon me.
How you doing? Let me scan it. This is one square, right? Yeah. Sandro? Yes, that's you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. All right, take care, my man. Have a good one.
More fabrics for masks. So I hope you're starting to get an idea of why the geometries are important. I want to show you something that is a way to think about how a curvy linear shape goes from dark to light. There's a little exercise. You can try this. And I'm not gonna look for evidence that you've done this, but you're always welcome to include any of these sketches in your portfolio work. You might do something you really like. And my drawing instructor and his drawing instructor before that, who was Joseph Albers, I think I mentioned that before, Joseph Albers. He was at the Bauhaus in the early 20th century, and he taught at Yale. At Yale University. And he taught my instructor, this was in the 50s, William Ryman, from the 60s to the 90s, taught at Harvard. Your instructor. This is really cool if you think about it. There's powerful continuity with history here. So these are exercises that this dude, right? Let me show you something of his. These are books that I hope you will be familiar with, but some of the most important work that Albers did, and his wife Annie Albers, who actually signed my book a long time ago. She didn't know I was going to own that book. Interaction of color. And this book, if you can get it, it's out of print now. It's Search versus Research. And these were lectures in the 60s at Yale. And these are really beautiful things that he does. He teaches about color, experimenting with a juxtaposition of different colored shapes. We don't do this in this class. You may do this in some of your foundation classes, right? Experimentation. But these are some really beautiful things. The exercises that we do are many of his drawing exercises. This is one of them. That's at the root of what we're studying. We're understanding ellipses. Letter forms. And a lot of other stuff that we simply don't have time for. But here's where he explains what happens to those shapes as they get transformed, distorted into 3D space. Really, understanding the ellipse or the circle and what happens to that circle is one of the most challenging, but it's amazing how much of drawing you can extend that to. Anyway, one of the exercises that Albers taught him and he taught me, and I'm showing you, it's called the 32-part circle. And also called the disappearing gradient. What's the disappearing gradient? That is what's happening here. we're gradually going from light to dark in around a circular form that's tilted back in 3D space. One way to understand the rate at which that changes, and it's really, really simple. It's an ingenious exercise. And you draw a circle, and the way we learn to draw a circle is you start with like 4 squares if you can do it. And you know the points of tangency are at the midpoints. I'm not doing this very carefully right now, but in order to understand this, imagine that's the circle, and imagine somewhere down here is an elliptical projection of that. So this is like a coin. It's being tilted back away from you, right? I think a quarter or one of those coins that actually has those lines. And the way to determine that rhythm is to divide the circle into 32 parts. So you see, I'm dividing it into equal parts, and then I'm cutting those parts in half through the center. And if you can manage it, if you've done it carefully enough, then you want to take those parts and divide them in half. I'm going to cheat just a little bit because I'm doing this so quickly that it's rather sloppy. So I'm just going to bring down some lines here. Get the boundaries of my ellipse. So imagine you have two concentric ellipses, right, that form the edge of that coin. How do I understand the rate in which that thing turns? Well, one way to do it is to take a line from the intersection of that curve and to bring it down, carry it through and if you do this carefully enough, you'll find I missed one of these. That the rate at which those lines get tighter, right? You recognize why the interval is small and gets bigger as you go around this, and is largest right there. And that's what's called the disappearing gradient. So it's a way of constructing that which you're trying to create in tone here. So why do I do this? It's another way to get you to think about going around that shape. So when you're looking at the base of a column, none of which I'm drawing very, very carefully here. And because, you know, we're looking at some kind of perspective drawing, one way to think about what happens as we go around this is to think about what happens here. Now, notice I'm not constructing it. I'm doing what I know to be true about the rate at which that changes. So this is a way to construct that phenomenon. If you find 32 parts difficult, try 16. Four, that's 8. 16 should be fairly easy. And then you can interpolate. But that, you know, the point is that's the rate that's what happens going around that ellipse. And if I wanted to draw it with shade, I could do it like that. All right, so there I did it terribly, but you get the idea. There's something gradual that happens. Here I'm going dark to dark. This is just this is a way to construct it. It's a way to construct the gradient. If you feel like trying this, go ahead. If you don't worry about it. What's important is that you understand what you're looking at, right? I want that to be clear to you guys that when we're looking at these shapes obliquely or at an angle, that's what I mean. Does everybody know what I mean by oblique? These are words you're going to forget from time to time. That means at an angle. An oblique typeface is italic, right? Slanted. Its opposite is straight on orthogonal, right? I'm looking at something at an angle. I'm looking at something obliquely. I'm turning it away at an angle. It's a wonderful word. If I refer to something obliquely, I refer to something indirectly. Another wonderful way to use a word in a different context. An oblique reference, kind of a sidelong glance or remark, whatever. There are lots of ways to practice looking at what happens. It's hard to do when you don't keep these sharp, and I misplaced my but if I play back my video, I'll find it. See where it ended up. All right, let me sharpen these two. Let's say I wanted to try to produce another way to look at something is to sort of look at something and enlarge it. Right? Just imagine what it is a little bit larger. So from what you know about perspective, even without, I know from this drawing that all the lines converge here, right? But I can pretend, let's do it with this, that those lines are converging somewhere, right? By slanting them toward some place over there somewhere. I know behind it, something like that happens. And if I wanted to construct that base, or the thing that it sits in, now I know I need several ellipses, but I know how to do this. I don't even care if they're the wrong size. What, do I care that I have exactly that proportion? No, I want to persuade whoever's looking at this that's what it is that they're looking at. Then I make a decision about light to dark. So this, in a sense, is a dress rehearsal for conducting that study. It's a rehearsal. Anything that makes it easier for you to understand what you're looking at. Now, these columns have a little bit of fatness to them, right? They are, remember the term entasis. This is what the Greeks used to visually compensate for things that you'd be looking at in perspective that would otherwise tend to appear thinner because they're tilted away from you. So the Greeks, they deliberately made these columns bowed, fatter around the entire length of the shaft, so that when it was turned away from you, see the tendency for them to get thinner? That's like 2,500 years ago they figured that out. So dark is going to be over here. You have your phones too. You can zoom in on the phone and look at the picture. That's fine. When I was in college, I didn't have my own phone. If you wanted to use a phone, you had to go somewhere, like either a phone booth or to somebody's house. Anyway, I have a tendency, somebody said last class, I remember, had a very light hand. You learn that about yourself. I tend to be really heavy-handed, and I have to resist the temptation to go in and start making dark marks right away. So sometimes it's good to work gradually. Do you see why working with pen and ink is a way of working up to this? Because this is much easier, isn't it? Because you have the ability to control what's happening as we turn around this. Or as we go from one side or the other. I can see that parts of it are darker. I kind of outsmarted myself with a white pencil. Now I'm fighting those white marks that I made over there. So what do I do on this side? Notice I'm not paying a lot of attention. I'm not trying to, this is not trying to create a high fidelity copy of this drawing. And if there's other parts that I observe in it that feel like there's another gradient that goes as it disappears around there, I can sort of work that in. Now, remember your drawing your work of fiction. Whatever happens here, and what happens, everything is a response to a mark that you've already made. You're responding to the context of a mark that you made before. The other thing about cardboard that you don't deal with when you're working with paper like this, it has a texture, and I'm fighting that as well over here because the texture, that is the ripple, which is part of the structure of the cardboard, is starting to read through my drawing. Don't worry about constructing this right away. It's perfectly all right to say, you know something, let me just study, let me just look at a couple of ellipses. Let's just try that and see where that goes. Of course, I did that backwards. Well, I could if I wanted to follow that. So these are just devices that I'm using to understand what's going on with that shape that I've turned, that I'm looking at obliquely in 3D space. Go ahead and work with that for a little bit while I'm going to try to locate another bit of this paper. So those lines go back somewhere back there. Doesn't matter where, but I know they're not, right? And because that's perspective, that ellipse is slanted. If you practice that shape, you can get fairly good with it. Here I'm doing without having lines, just knowing what happens to that gradient, right? You can get that thing to turn and then come back the other way. Um, let's take a break. Take a break for a little bit. Continue to work all the. I'll try to improve on this in a little bit. I'll leave this thing up on the screen. All right. let me know that you guys are comfortable drawing these the lines that I'm using to scaffold this. Like by now, the reason I repeat these things so much is that at some point I want for this construction for you guys to become sort of second nature. You know, these lines converge somewhere, right? You know, this distance is squat. It's highly compressed. And because you're looking in perspective, that ellipse is slanted. So really it is 1, 2, 3. I'm using these shapes to do the entire drawing. And then when, you know, I'm just sort of constructing downwards. Here I see that I need something for the front of that pedestal, right? I see that it's largely light, but a bit fainter. Something unusual happens as it turns the corner, so to speak. With a little bit of effort, those marks you can really get those marks to just sit where you want them on your drawing, and it's about making sure that those shapes are sufficiently compressed. That's why we belabor a simple interior. This is an interior, right? Probably much more complex than most interiors that you will encounter. Yeah. Then just because you do a drawing one way doesn't mean that the next drawing has to be done the same way. You could discover something slightly different. Like I'm looking at this a second time, and I'm seeing this sort of a dark streak happening, but fading that way. Again, you know, it's a gradient. Still, it happens gradually, dark to light, but it's highlighting something different. So if you discover in a different drawing you want to explore that, go ahead and do that. It's perfectly reasonable to go after something else. I left way too much room on the top of that pedestal there. That's all right. And that may be, it may be that is the point, that's the point of interest that you're your drawing. Does anybody have anything they want to share, or do you want to wait till later to do that? Or, you know, I don't like to push you guys, but, you know, feel free. Some of you have emailed me with drawings. I'd like you to feel comfortable doing that. It's a good idea to begin scanning or recording or otherwise creating a visual image of your drawings, because later we're going to put them together in a portfolio.
I can show you mine. I've just done like a little study. I think
Okay.
it's at the bottom.
Yeah. What do I do here? Spotlight for everyone. Have I done that? Oh, I have to stop sharing. Wait. Oh, great, great, great. That's great. See how Emily stopped in the middle and let the paper take over that middle ground. That's what you want to happen there. And now we want a little more white on the outside of where the column, the shaft of the column, yep, where
Okay.
it meets that, and well done.
Thank you.
Sandro,
Yes.
can I show you too?
Yes, please do. Good, good. What you discovered in the second drawing where you did that gradient is it doesn't pinch in the middle. It's much more effective, but you've discovered it in that the rendering of the base. Now you want to look a little bit more closely. What happens? Does the black on the inside face, you know, on the dark side face of the column base, does it get that light in the center, or is it more, you know, sort of a gradual black? These are, so whatever it is, it's going to be a response to the mark you made, but you're well on your way to doing that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. Sorry about that. I really don't understand how these things work. All right, I'll put my screen back up. So the studies don't have to be limited to the column, the base of the column. It's all right. There's some other elements in here I can barely see in this picture, but I did send you larger. They're not quite so interesting, but let me see if I can. Okay. Other parts of interesting is what happens in those cross vaults that sit on top, that bear down on top of those columns. So one of the next things I will do is to bring some of that over. I think I'm going to have an easier time with this drawing, right? So it's these shapes that I want. Those arches. Seven B, that's what I want. See if I can do this with, oh, I have to take these. By the way, Felice Silverman, who I went to college with and studied a lot of the same stuff. I'm going to sharpen this the old-fashioned way and make a mess of my desk, but I need that lead. Oops. Woo. Felice Silverman is an NCIDQ ambassador. That is the agency that licenses interior designers. Although you don't need a license in Massachusetts to practice interior design, there's an advantage to becoming licensed. And usually when you go to work for a firm, they will support or otherwise sponsor or finance that you're testing. It's in their interest to do that. Right. Oh, look at my pencil lead. My lead. No, not enough. It's okay to do parts of it at a time. I'm just holding it up to the light to see if I got everything I needed there. No. I ought to be able to get it with that. Is that gonna? No, let me get some of it. Back. Don't worry if you don't do this that I'm doing right now. I'm contemplating one way to do it. Drafting dots. Dots. Anybody familiar with a candy called Dots? It's remarkable. I don't think I've eaten one of those in like 40 years. But if you hold up a box, I know exactly what they taste like. I would not forget the experience of eating a dot. So there. So much for dots. And I'm going to use a red pen so I can see what I went over. This is a new experience every time. I always learn another way of doing this. Oh, there's a lot of pencil there. And no pencil there. All right, I may as well just drawing on the back of this. I hate when that happens. See what happens if it gets some of that elliptical. This pencil is going to last one more day. It's some of the top of that capital. The trouble with the black and white Prismacolor, if you get too much drawing, you end up fighting, competing, with the shape of the drawing. So you got to be careful about that. I'm improvising now because I didn't record those shapes in here. But now you guys see this and you say, oh, easy peasy. I know what to do there because I know exactly what happens, more or less, right? Remember, we're not trying to land somebody on the moon. Some of the light and dark, you take your cues from the photo, right? So overall, I know that it's lighter, in the courtyard side, and it's darker on the interior side of this. And some of it is going to be simply responding to the to what you've drawn so far. So if I want to improvise that gradient or exaggerate it, or tone it down, that's okay too. As long as I understand that it's still a gradient, it still has to gradually, it changes color. It's hard to describe this as color when you're working with a black and a white pencil, but that really is what you're experiencing, is a change in color around that shape. I kind of missed the inside of an arch over there. So something else is going on. That's going to be a bit more work. I'm missing stuff over here, but you know what? This is my work of fiction. It was a starting point. Maybe I decide as I get closer to where the cross vaults inflect, or when they change direction, I get darker. So if I decide that, I can work that out. Of course, I also made a conscious decision to not use white inside of that, but that could change. As I start looking at the surfaces that are closest to the interior of the courtyard. And the courtyard itself has some value. That I may not want to ignore. I don't have to commit to a really intense value for that. Sorry. It's a little bit of white facing this way. And if I'm missing something in the, you know what? Improvise. It's remarkable how little information you need to transfer from one place to another to get a semblance of what it is that you want to describe there. missing some information, but I can improvise. Even with pencil, the some consistency of mark helps the drawing read. So see, I've left out a lot, but I'm still communicating to the viewer I'm underneath something. There is some kind of enclosure, and I'm building up whatever's going on outside relative to what's going on inside. Don't be afraid to make a mistake with that. If you find something you like that happens that you like I like that white is exaggerated out there, I might want to explore that, right? There's nothing to keep me from building up what's going on out there. I'm missing a column. Big deal. Punish me. You tell your viewers, I don't care that I'm missing a column, but do you get that you're in some kind of shelter? You're underneath something. We could build it back in if we wanted to, from what we know. About what we learned here. Right? My drawing instructor used to do things like this. To form a sharp edge, just take that straight edge and draw to it. You got to be careful because where that intersects reads a certain way, but it you know, it's a way to fake that part of it. What am I missing here? We have some lines. I think they're darker on, I think they're darker on that side. what's wonderful is sometimes you have little accidents like that and you say, oh yeah, let me make it dark there and then fade away. And then just sort of play with what happens. Suddenly that becomes an interesting part of your drawing. It's not all going to be a smashing success. There are going to be parts of it that you discover something of interest. There are going to be things that you, my God, I wish I did something differently there. Maybe you look at it a little and say, you know what, I actually do see a little bit of light. On some of that surface. You see what I'm after there? Got to be careful drawing over something you've already drawn, because once you start mixing these, they get confusing. But it's okay to work in a little of something. Again, I'm responding to what I've drawn before. Lighting in here is getting these reflections. It's a little bit difficult to see if I can make that go away. And explore these moments if I want to. That's happening off in the distance. I'm taking liberties with the marks, the size, the proportions, the size. I don't care. It's just something I want to move back there, to push back into the drawing. And I'm just doing it with black and white. If this drawing were larger, I could explore the rosettes. Everybody know what rosettes? Little flowers around the top of the Capitol. Where can I draw? How do I know how big to make them? Well, I learned from this drawing. The concept is that the shape gets smaller as it turns around the circle. I don't even know what these things are, right? They could be flowers. Let me draw a little bit bigger. You guys pick the best profession in the whole world, because you get into a drawing and you just discover something else you want to learn about it. What's more fun than that? Let's say the flower is something like this, right? Then the next one's got to be skinnier. These are ellipses, right? They get crushed. The next one, the interval is going to be smaller and they're skinnier still. And the next one, oh, it's really big. Doesn't fit in there. I could barely fit in there, squeezing in there, right? Maybe there's a big fat one. Just by making that thing smaller, as it turns what happens in between? What happens underneath? These are just more of the same. Rosettes. I want you guys to enjoy this exploration. We're not here to be really highly ultra critical about what you're drawing. But if you apply something about what you understand about that geometry to what you're trying to describe, you can make an interesting drawing. All I'm trying to elicit from you guys is an interesting drawing, something where you surprise yourself and say, wow, I did that. I don't know how the heck I did that, but I did it. That's what happens. And when that happens, it's wonderful because your curiosity gets piqued. You want to do more. You want to start to explore more. So we'll continue with a black and white Prismacolor for this afternoon. Think about, now that you're somewhat into it, how much time you feel comfortable with spending on the drawings. I want to make sure that we have this problem in hand before we move on to the next thing. And I want you to have that those drawings in front of me. So I'll remind you via email. It's not very difficult at all. I hope you're discovering that with with a little bit of preparation, I can go from this to this, and this becomes so much more than the sum of its parts. So Felice Silverman goes on at 1:05 p.m. We're actually meeting up a little bit beforehand. It'll be worth watching because this is sort of a once every 5-year type event. And if you're interested in interior design as a profession, I think you're going to learn a lot. You'll learn a lot from that session. And ask questions. Okay, see you soon. See you at the meeting, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you.